Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast in association with eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday, the 18th of July, and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson, for what is episode 366.
It is, isn't it? I mean, it's going to get scary when we get towards that 500 episode, isn't it? To be fair, we'll have to start thinking about how we celebrate some of this, I think, going forward. But because we keep passing sort of benchmarks, don't we? We
do, yes. Yeah, we get sort of caught up in the cut and thrust of recording them. So I guess the next one's 375. We'll have a little celebration for that.
We'll think of something. Yeah, we'll think of something. I mean, we haven't had a special interview this week, have we, for COVID? I think everybody's been fairly busy out there in the market with restrictions lifting and other things going on now. So, and obviously we're going to go through many of the headlines of what's been happening in the market. But we've obviously had some cracking recent interviews, though, haven't we, pre this week?
We have, yeah. I mean, just over the course of the last 4 weeks or so, we've had Rob Lindley, MD of Mitsubishi UK, Clive Brook of Clive Brook Volvo, Mike Jones from ASC, Darren Martin from CAP HPI, and Sebastian Fuchs from Mannheim Europe. So they're all still available to listen to on the podcast platform, whatever your favourite podcast platform is, or Spotify or any of the others.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting because we have got a story in today's headlines from CAP HPI, haven't we, in terms of the values and where the direction of the values are heading. And
yes,
it'll be interesting for the listeners to listen back to that interview with Darren on the previous episode there, and listen to his forecast around the volatility of the market that he forecasts going forward, and obviously what he's now talking about in terms of data and things like that. So definitely worth going back for that. And we've still got the industry legend interview that's still to come, still to get a confirmed date on, but that is still in the bag to do, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's not a term we bandy around lightly. This person really is an industry legend, so hopefully we'll get that in the diary pretty soon. So we'll keep you informed as and when that will be.
Definitely. So what have we got in the headlines this week, Curtis?
Right, okay. I had a look at the headlines. I've done a roundup, and as in all previous weeks, it's been a busy old week for the sector. But the story of the week is very much around Cazoo buying Imperial Car supermarkets. And strategically, that's a fascinating one because Cazoo was a defiant digital disruptor who's now gone down the bricks to clicks route. Is it bricks to clicks?
Yes, clicks to bricks. Clicks to bricks. Clicks to bricks, the other way around.
Got it the wrong way around, guys. Yeah. As you mentioned, we've got the latest on used car values from CAP HPI, and staying with used cars, we've got a look at list prices in June and demand levels as well from eBay Motors Group. We've got a full year financial roundup from Motorpoints, the UK's biggest car supermarket, and also a trading update from Vertu with a stronger than expected June. CarWow reports a cooling of demand and interest in EVs, and finally this week, well, what can I say? It's a very silly name for a new car giant.
Like you say, I mean, we'll get to the story, but it's probably a good job it's not a customer name, isn't it? Because I think we'd be getting a tongue tied on that one when we continually get to it. But we'll get to that one at the end there. But I think you've mentioned it. I mean, the big story of this week, which kind of came out over the weekend in terms of sort of leaks of what could be happening, and then it was very quickly announced earlier on in the week. And this is a story on Car Dealer Mag, and this is, as you say there, Curtis, an online used car dealer, Cazoo, confirms it has bought used car supermarket group Imperial Cars. And I mean, that is a serious acquisition, taking on the Imperial Cars, which have been a leading supermarket, as we know, over the years. And Neil Smith has definitely led that one, an 18 location supermarket straight in from Cazoo there.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I didn't see this one coming, and it was an exclusive from Car Dealer. They broke the story, as you say, over the weekend on Sunday, so they really did lead the way with this one. And yeah, as you say, Cazoo's buying the Imperial Car supermarket chain, all 18 sites, and it provides them overnight with a ready-made national network of not just showrooms, but storage facilities, distribution network, after sales collection hubs. So in terms of being a good fit, it's absolutely perfect, and shows the sort of changing strategy there of Cazoo, because as I mentioned before, they came to the market as a defiant digital disruptor, and now they're seeing the value of going down the bricks route. So Imperial, we've covered Imperial a lot over recent months and years, and that's an impressive network they've got there. 18 sites, they're selling over 2,500 cars a week, and they've got sites based from the south. They're based in Southampton, but the representation goes from Exeter up to Cardiff, across to Wembley, up to Birmingham, and then up to Grangemouth in Falkirk in Scotland. So they really are a truly national network.
And I mean, hugely successful. That's not, the Imperial Cars started back by director Mike Bell. He's built the business through the years to which made 1.1 million profit in its last financial year, 2018-2019. So and the other bit that we need to consider here is that straight away they've got some good expertise straight into the business, because they are keeping on the management team of Imperial Cars. So straight away Cazoo, in terms of aligning themselves with some industry expertise alongside their sort of digital expertise that we know they've got heavy experience in throughout the years there with Alex Chesterman, gives them a huge footprint in the UK, and that's right on the back of the valuation that was recently announced of 800 million, and the recent sort of sponsorship of Everton of 10 million. So they're very quickly moving in what is since restriction lift on the 1st of June.
Yeah, and they're doing a lot of TV advertising, very, very high profile, and this is going to be fascinating to see how this pans out now, because it does give Cazoo a significant physical foothold.
Yeah, and it'll be good to get Neil on. I mean, Neil's been recently throughout sort of lockdown, very, very prevalent on some of the webinars and speaking about what they've been doing at Imperial Cars, sort of in that e-commerce space through the lockdown period, and obviously as the business opened again. So maybe if Neil is listening, that we can invite Neil on to talk through some of the wins that they've been having through Imperial Cars and talk through the acquisition a little bit more at some stage.
Yeah, and moving on, next headline is from AM Online, and it's market correction of used car values expected after rapid restart. So this is the story we were talking about earlier from Cap HBI, and the piece suggests that the used car market could be on course for a similar market correction to that seen in May last year, after car dealers and remarketing companies flew out of the blocks post-lockdown. Now, what do you make of this? Because we were talking about this before we started recording, and I was trying to cast my mind back to what happened in May last year.
Seems a long time ago now, May last year.
It does,
with recent months.
Anything before March is a long time ago. So remind us what happened in May last year.
I think whether it's market correction, the valuations realigning themselves, or obviously what Darren's talking about there is obviously that follow on from that pent up demand as dealers have opened, and many will listening today will be questioning whether that's the case or not, because a lot of the dealers I've been talking to in recent weeks are still seeing that pent up demand, still seeing positive activity. I think the challenge for some of them is getting the right stock at the right price. But I think, casting your mind back to 2019, I think what they're referring at is that 2019 saw a full year of 15.3% depreciation. Now, that was on the back of a 2018 figure of 5.8% down as a full year depreciation. That's a 3-year 60 point. Now, between May and September of last year, between those months, that the market saw a minus 10.6% drop in valuations after a fairly strong start to the year in the first quarter and partway through that second quarter. And if you compare that to this year now, put this in context, this is also excluding May and June, because as we know from the interview with Darren, that the froze values in May and June in terms of the published figures, the year to date is 0.4% down. Now that compares to the same point last year at 11.4% down and a 2018 figure of minus 2.6% down. So again, it's a view that I always have with this, that it is, used cars are a depreciating asset. They do go down in value as you get new cars coming in at the front end and you get nearly new product coming in at that front end market. And, at some stage, the market does, in a way, correct itself. Now, whether it is a market correction or it is just a realignment of, the way the demand is heading, because like Darren did say on his interview with us, that he does expect us to go into a period of volatility, and that's down to supply and demand. And we've got some stories coming up next around that sort of unemployment and redundancy across the sector, but we are still seeing acquisitions and growth as well. So it's a very interesting and very volatile market at the minute, which is one to watch. But I mean, in the story there, Darren does share some of his views on how some of the sectors are performing as well, aren't they? So it'll be one to watch.
Yeah, it's interesting because he does say that sales volumes are at 95% of the anticipated norm, which, considering showrooms in England have only been open since beginning of June, that's a very strong restart. And he does go on to say that remarketers and retailers' ability to rapidly adapt to the new trading climate, particularly through online sales, had helped deliver these sort of volumes. And he had not expected to see these sort of volumes for 3 to 5 months. So it is an encouraging restart, and he does actually attribute much of the strength in the market to the actions taken during the lockdown not to cut prices, which I know is something that CAP HPI championed throughout the period.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot to happen yet. I mean, we talked the other week about the new car performance for June. Probably the expectation that we could see a reasonably strong performance again in the private sector for new cars in the month of July, because as you said before, that we didn't see all of Wales and all of Scotland, and we had obviously only England open from the 1st of June, so really June wasn't a true representation of a full month trading from a new car perspective. We know that fleets were down in the business and fleet sector. We know that contract hire companies are holding back on replenishing fleets. So, again, it's going to be an interesting one around that supply and demand. But also, we know that consumer index is dropping. There's the threat of more redundancies to come. So, it's I think it's very difficult to call the market at the minute, but we just know, as we said, it's going to be a period of volatility with the sort of that increase and decrease. I mean, we're seeing localised lockdowns, we're seeing sort of further lockdowns hit the headlines. So there's a lot to come in there.
Yeah, plenty to play out. And next headline is from Car Dealer, and it's used car demand is running nearly 50% higher than pre-lockdown, but prices fall slightly in June. So this is based on data produced by eBay Motors Group, which I helped the guys there with produce a press release on. And it's a summary of what happened in the market in June. So average list prices in June dropped just 1.3%, which equated to around £167. Sales leads volumes for the month were 46% higher than pre-lockdown levels. So, a strong indicator there of pent-up consumer demand and buyers looking at their next purchase. Sorry.
No. I was going to say it's again, we trying to compare sort of like for like is a challenge, isn't it? I mean, we discussed this on previous podcasts when you start looking at June performance compared to June performance this year when it comes to some of the days in stock figures and things like that. But as we know, the eBay motors were fully operational throughout lockdown, weren't they? And those vehicles were on the site and available for sale.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And the piece does go on to say the average list price of a used car remained stable throughout June as those dealer showrooms gradually started to reopen. And interestingly, the wholesale sector, obviously that was closed for most of the lockdown. So used cars were in short supply, with dealers averaging in June just 51 cars in stock, and that compared to 66 units 12 months ago.
And we've got a top 10, because I don't think we've had a top 10 for a while, have we? Did we? I think it's been a while since we've had our top 10, but we have got a top 10 for the fastest selling cars for June, going from the Citroën DS4 in the first position with the lowest days in stock at 54.5 days there.
Yeah, followed by the BMW 8 Series at 56 days, the Citroën DS3 at 62.5 days, and the Volkswagen Fox at 63.4 days.
Yeah, and then obviously carrying on down there, we've got the Suzuki Grand Vitara, 67.7 days, Astra GTC 65.7 days, the Renault Zoe interestingly at 65.9 days, and then the SLC Mercedes at 66.1 days.
Yeah, and we'll return to EVs later.
We will. So moving on to the next story, was kind of intimated before about the acquisition, and this is that Motorpoint suffers profit drop of 15% to 18.8 million, and the revenue takes a tumble. But actually at the same time, they have announced the opening of 2 further operations, haven't they?
They have, yeah. So this, as you say, it's their full year trading statement to the end of March. Pre-tax profit fall of 15.3% to 18.8 million, and revenue down 3.8% to just over 1 billion. So in its full year, it obviously indicated the impact of March, the busiest month of their year. So with the impact of the shutdown, and as you say, they have announced that they will be adding 2 more sites, their 14th and 15th sites, that they have been secured. And opening dates are being reviewed. We don't know where they are yet, but that'll be interesting to see where they pop up. And also they do mention that over the course of that financial year, they opened their 13th site, which was in Swansea, yes. I think. Yeah. Yes. And also a dedicated prep centre in Peterborough, which is very much their sort of centralised hub for their network.
Yeah, and they do say that in the results they do reference that during the 2 months of lockdown they completed 2,000 home deliveries as well. So great result there in terms of being able to do that, and we know other dealers have done similar, whereas some didn't do anything. They didn't get involved with the click and collect or the home deliveries throughout that lockdown period. But again, 2,000 home deliveries there, which I suppose in one way gives them a little bit less than some others in terms of once the restrictions eventually lifted. But great that the activity still continued into the lockdown, and straight away they are talking about 2 further operations to open. So again, I'm sure we'll be talking about them when they do eventually release where they are.
Yeah, and some interesting developments in the supermarket sector. So we'll be tracking them closely over the coming weeks and months. So you're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast in association with eBay Motors Group, the only weekly podcast serving the car retailing sector, and available online at motortraderadio.com and by subscribing even on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Deezer, and of course SoundCloud.
Yeah, and we're heading over to AM Online now. So this is on the back of the trading update from Vertu Motors. And, as we said before, we've had Robert on the podcast. So, again, still available there to listen to. Fantastic interview. And I think at the minute it's still probably one of our highest downloads at the minute there. And I think it was one of the earlier ones that we did in lockdown, wasn't it, there with Robert. But very insightful chat there with Robert, as always.
Yeah, you can come back anytime you like, Robert.
Yes, definitely.
You're good for the ratings.
It'd be interesting if you can beat your last record.
Yes.
We could say that it was down to people being at home on lockdown, but we won't go down there with Robert.
In fact, that's the sort of challenge that Robert would appreciate, wouldn't he?
Yeah. So, Robert has been talking a lot lately about some of the results, some of the activity throughout Vertu Motors, what they've done. And this is a story, like I say, in M Online, and Vertu Motors to reduce employee headcount by 345 to future-proof the business. And albeit it's 345, it is 6% of approximately 6% of their overall colleagues and workforce, isn't it, within the Vertu group. But that's also at the same time as him publishing their trading update on the. In June, so they do talk about a 9 million profit before tax ahead of the prior year and above the group's original business plan of 8.6 million, and obviously having incurred adjustment loss before tax of 14.1 million in the March to May period. So, all considered, I think it's still a fairly strong result there from Vertu.
It is, yeah, and they do shed some light on the June trading in relation to used cars. And there's a comment here that as part of the focus on cash generation, a targeted reduction in used vehicle stock of 20.9 million was delivered in June, which obviously bolstered cash balances. But they go on to say that given the current buoyant used car market conditions, no further reductions in stock levels are planned in the short term. So there is so much focus at the moment on the used car market, and Vertu are certainly looking at building that part of their business.
Yeah, and it does go on to say, and I think he alluded to it in our interview, that much of the after sales departments had remained open throughout lockdown, and obviously saw a continual increase in momentum with a very strong high margin after sales performance in June. Obviously, that was benefiting, as others have mentioned, from that pent up demand, and added 2 additional working days to the year on year. So again, great result there. They do talk about the the fleet market being down 53.2%, commercial vehicle 6%, and used car sales by 5.9%. So again, all things considered, I think it's a fairly strong, robust trading update there from Vertu.
Yeah, and next we head over to Motor Trader, and the headline is Pandemic Economic Damage Hits Demand for Electric Cars. So this is based on some research carried out by Carwow into what buyers are looking at the moment. So the conclusion of a survey that they carried out found that 67% of consumers are less likely to purchase an electric car now than they were prior to the lockdown measures being introduced. And this doesn't really come as a huge surprise because I guess a lot of buyers are sticking to what they know, what they feel comfortable with, and they will be reverting back to petrol and in some instances diesel. So EV has been sort of pushed to the back burner.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an area being discussed quite a lot at the minute. I mean, the OEMs have returned to that green agenda. However, we've got to be aware that the CAFE legislation still sort of exists, albeit we're not quite sure what will happen after December through the WTO and the end of the rollout period of Brexit there. So there's a lot to be discussed. But I think when we talked about the scrappage scheme, and I think in some of our interviews, the guest there alluded to the fact that EV probably isn't one of the priorities. We know when we talked about the scrappage scheme being a government incentive focused on EV, I think the pushback was that one, the supply isn't necessarily there to do anything to the UK economic market, and two, the demand won't be there either. These consumers, as you say, they take quite a long time to research electric vehicles and whether it's the right vehicle for them, and many will be at the minute looking at what vehicles they need for the future. I mean, what you were talking about with some of the eBay Motors results there, and what we've been talking about on the podcast and within Cox Automotive is there's still a lot to come out of this around the consumer behaviours, the working behaviours, the type of journeys people would be doing, and potentially, as you said right at the start of the story, Curtis, that maybe it's just better to stick with what you know rather than move into another market that you're not quite so sure about at a time where you're not quite so sure of what your future motoring behaviours will look like after this pandemic. So again, probably not a high priority for many people, albeit it will be back on the agenda soon enough, and it is already from many OEMs.
Yeah, and I guess the most telling stat from the survey is that half of the 500 consumers who were polled said they had more important things to worry about than looking at buying an EV, and 13% said they were waiting for an incentive. So there you go. Pretty damning.
Yeah, there's not one coming in, unfortunately.
No. I think they've got a long way.
There's a lot moved on since that incentive, so I think it'd be good. I say at some point, hopefully, we'll get somebody on in terms of that's very knowledgeable within that EV market, and just to think about what's happening for the future of EVs and what that market could look like. As many have said that actually, post December. Will the UK look like a proposition for many OEMs to be placing some of their EV batteries? We're not quite sure yet, are we? So
and also let's not forget that a lot of the demand for EVs will come from the fleet sector. So I'm assuming that not many of those 500 people polled were fleet decision makers.
Exactly.
So that's really where the demand is going to come from.
And then moving over to our final story, and this is one that we picked up on the Telegraph. It's in other nationals as well, and this is that, as you said, Fiat and Peugeot rebrand merged company as Stellantis. I think I've pronounced that correctly. I think.
It could be Stellantis. But you know what? That sums it up already, doesn't it? How the hell do you pronounce it?
What is it? According to the two manufacturers, the new label is rooted in the Latin verb stello, meaning the Brighton with stars. So,
as anyone who drinks Stella Artois will know,
Brighton with stars, yeah, something else there. But I think this is referring back to the merger that was announced in December last year, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
With a 50-50 merger between the two businesses there, and as we were talking before the recording of today's podcast, that this is meant to be a corporate name of their new merger, rather than a consumer brand. Which what did you say? Thank God for that in many ways. But it's going to be an interesting one, this one.
Yes, yeah, and you're right. The Stellantis logo will not be appearing on any Alphas, Citroens, Dodges, Vauxhalls, Rams, Maseratis. The list is endless. They've got some strong trade names there.
But I think the key with this is what as a brand between the two businesses there, and I think looking past the rebrand of the corporate name to reference the merger between the two, I think this really is a fantastic move for the two brands, and I think that we do know that many of the brands do collaborate in certain areas. We've seen businesses and OEMs sort of collaborate in the mobility sector and things like that, but they do actually reference that in the story that this is the new leaders in the next era of mobility. So I think that's kind of a clue as to the direction that these two brands are heading, and I'm sure there'll be a lot to come from these two, experts in their own right, and fantastic strong brands in their own right in the sector, and with them working together on the market, we've probably got a lot to come from this one.
Yeah, and it would have cost them an absolute fortune to pay a marketing agency to come up with the name. I could have helped them out on this. I would have suggested PSA FC.
Did you not get the call or the email? Did they not email you?
No, I must have been on my phone at the time.
Because, I thought you were on the list. Actually, I thought I saw your name on the list when they sent it across. But
well, I could have saved them a lot of money and a lot of effort, and come up with a more sensible name. But hey, there you go. But interestingly, the combined operations, they are huge. This will put the PSA Fiat Group behind. They'll be the third largest by revenue behind VW Group, Renault, Nissan, and Toyota. And in terms of car production, absolute car production, and they'll be the third biggest by revenue.
Yeah, interesting that they do cite at the end of the story in one of the stories, the Autocar report, that the merger is under investigation by the European Union, which is obviously concerned that it would become too dominant in its commercial vehicle market, and that they cite that FCA and PSA sold 775,000 trucks and vans combined in 2019, which is about 34% of the whole market. So, yes. Put the fact that it's under investigation for the merger, to have a market share within that sector of trucks and vans of 34% actually does demonstrate what you're just saying there about the size and the footprint of those two operations.
Yeah, that is significant, and there will be a lot of objections from other European manufacturers. I suppose it's worth finishing on with some good news about PSA, because just before we started recording, they announced that Ellesmere Port, the Vauxhall production plant for Astra, will reopen, and they've named a date for the 17th of August. So that's really good news, because that's one of the plants we were waiting to hear more about when it was reopening. So they've confirmed that.
No, you're right there. I think seeing that on social media that it's had some good response there, because again, it was one of the plants in the UK that we're currently closed, and we're waiting confirmation whether it was going to continue production and when that production would be. So I know there's others, like one of the JLR plants hasn't opened yet, and one or two others, but that's great news, isn't it, for the UK? So again, with jobs as well, getting people back into the businesses, and back in that factory there. So as you say, they're great news. So we've had some cracking headlines this week. As I say, we started off the week with Cazoo there. It changes it, as you say there, from a bricks to clicks to a clicks to bricks in a way, and many is it a case that they're now becoming a challenger to the sector rather than a disruptor to the sector. Great news there from Motorpoint there, that albeit not the best of trading updates for them, but actually, do you know what? They've still sort of opened up their site and a refurb centre, plus cited two further sites to open there, and again, great results there from Virtue Motors, albeit there is some headcount reduction, 6% of their workforce, but and there with eBay Motors, that starting to see sort of some of the activity and some of the stats come out following the period of lockdown and what that will start to look like for the remainder of the year. Because the reality is we're out of usual seasonality now, aren't we? So it's going to be quite interesting when we start to do annual comparisons of performance on things like days in stock. And a bit of a stark warning there from, again, worth listening to the Darren Martin interview, but a bit of a stark warning there that we are now potentially entering this period of volatility, and you know, how long can the pent-up demand last? How long can the values hold up? Will very much depend on, one, the supply and obviously the demand, the basic economics of vehicle values in the market, which is one to see, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So plenty of headlines, a busy old week, but unfortunately that's all from us. So you've been listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Join Philip and I again next weekend for our review of the headlines, and do look out for the latest in our series of special interviews with industry leaders and analysts. So until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.